Let's talk about all of this with my next guest, Steve Baker. He's Conservative MP. He's also Deputy Chair of the COVID Recovery Group, the rebel Tory MPs trying to fight for a little piece of sanity on these great British Isles. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning, Julia.
I don't want to make it too me, but I am representative of hundreds of thousands of people right now who don't have COVID, have had a negative test, which has been registered with the NHS, which they required me to take to tell them that I don't have COVID. And yet we're not allowed to leave our homes, not allowed to go to work. I'm very lucky. I still can somehow do my job at home and still get paid. Hundreds of thousands aren't. We're told we could have 2 million people isolating by the end of this week. It's a madness, isn't it?
It is a madness, Julian. You're a great example of how things are going terribly wrong. I mean, we know from the Health Secretary getting COVID that whilst the vaccines do largely stop serious illness and death, we know that you can still catch coronavirus and you can still transmit coronavirus. So I'm really not sure at all what the logic is of COVID passports, even if you're willing to accept them in principle. So these are crazy times. We know that you've tested negative on a PCR test. I'm still waiting to hear from someone why you should be under house arrest after testing negative. And these are crazy times.
It is. I mean, it's very different even from lockdown. You're actually not allowed out for an hour's walk. And I mean, luckily the weather's a bit miserable. I do have the thought in my head the whole way since this has happened, though, is that if I had tested positive, I'd have had to notify legally all my contacts over the last week, which would have included an awful lot of cabinet ministers. So at least I've had my revenge in that scenario.
Yes, indeed.
There is an irony there. But this is it. Let's talk about the vaccine passports. At a time, by the way, when case rates going down 5 days in a row. Now, this is impossible to be happening, as you know, Steve, because we have not gone back into lockdown. We have got more freedom in the last week than we had previously. People can meet up in their own homes, no limit on numbers, no limit on going to the pub bar, doing all of that. And yet, far fewer people are testing positive than they were 5-6 days ago. How is that possible if we haven't been in lockdown?
Well, that's the question that everybody seems to be asking. And I think once again, it casts the modelling in a very bad light. I thought we were told to expect 100,000 cases a day or even 200,000. Well, we're not quite out of the woods yet, but we're approaching a point, surely, where ministers must ask the most serious questions about why these models are so often so very wrong. They seem to be treated as black boxes by the rest of the policy-making machine. And the result is we get these policies which then seem to make no sense. It really is time I'm afraid, for an Office of Research Integrity to really look closely at these models. I mean, presumably the models accounted for the fact that the schools were going to break up. That was easily foreseeable. So now when I listen to the radio and find people saying, oh, well, the schools have broken up, well, it doesn't make any sense. The schools were bound to break up. It was surely in the models. If it wasn't in the models, why not? But we can't be basing policy on models which are so frequently so badly wrong and always to the downside for good reasons. People are only human, and so they're risk averse. But this is a nonsense for our lives, millions, tens of millions of people's lives to be guided by models which are so wrong. It really is a madness.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I think a lot of people are just finding it absolutely crazy that we were told at the beginning of the end of last year, we've got the vaccine. I mean, look, whether or not people agreed with lockdowns or not before, we've got the vaccine. And as soon as the vulnerable people are vaccinated, then we'll be free. And people have queued up in their droves. I mean, I'm sure you can remember the beginning of the year. I mean, people were tweeting about, all that people were messaging people about. Everyone in every family WhatsApp group was saying, have you got your vaccine? Yeah, mum's got hers, dad's got hers, second. I mean, people were excited about it because it was not just making sure our elder relatives were safe. It was also about all of us getting our lives back. And yet they didn't then deliver our lives back. Now we're told all this pressure to get people in their 20s and 30s vaccinated, even though, by the way, already over 60% of those people have turned up for their first jab, many of them not eligible for their second jab, by the way, desperate for their second jab so they could go away on a holiday and not face quarantine. But now there's more and more of a push for vaccine passports. We were told the vaccine passports were coming, then they weren't, then they were, then they weren't, they definitely wouldn't happen, and it seems to have gone back and forward. Now we're talking about them not just for nightclubs, but for Premier League matches, possibly even for universities to go to a lecture, possibly for workplaces. A third of big British companies have signalled they could actually require them of staff before they can return to work. What's going on?
It's a very good question, and I'm starting to really wonder what is going on. I mean, I'm looking at the ONS infection survey. 91.9% of people in England is the estimated percentage of adults who would test positive for COVID-19 antibodies. We know that vaccination uptake is heading up towards 90%. We would expect it to go through it. I would have thought, people want these vaccines. I remember when they first came out, people in Wickham were absolutely desperate to get their vaccination, and it was all a question of supply. So given how brilliantly the vaccine rollout has gone, given how well it is working to stop serious illness and death, you really do have to ask what is going on. I'm pretty clear in my own mind that what it is the government choosing effectively to coerce young people to get vaccinated. I would have thought we could do better, surely, than threatening vaccine passports, because I do think it's a proper slippery slope, this one. We're now looking at digital IDs. We're looking at a social credit system being trialled to get people to deal with obesity. Central bank digital currencies will enable the state to enormously intervene in our lives. And, reasonably, you can sit back and say, wow, what is going on with the change in the relationship between the individual and the state? And I can see why some people are quite frightened.
I have to say, neither you nor I are conspiracy theorists at all. But I have to say that the government is giving an awful lot of ammunition to conspiracy theorists who are saying this is all a big conspiracy. Let's talk about that social credit system. That was on the front page of one of the Sunday newspapers yesterday. I think the Sunday Telegraph, talking about a system where effectively you would have an app from the government and you'd be rewarded for what you bought, what you ate, how much exercise you did. You get credit for it. Now, people might think, this is very innocent. This is a way of helping people deal with obesity. That's an important issue in this country. But of course, after China introduced this system a few years ago, and it's been expanded massively, it's a social credit system. You know an awful lot about this. It's incredibly sinister how this is used in China, incredibly controlling. Talk to us about why you are fearful of this sort of mission creep.
Well, what does human dignity mean? Once upon a time, freedom was the highest end of politics, but these sort of messages don't appear to resonate anymore, not even amongst the political class. But what I'm sure of is that officials mean well. They mean to help us. And of course, they also trust themselves in a spirit of innocence to be doing the right thing. And so my sense is that officials are unafraid of introducing a highly controlling system which incentivizes people to do what's in their own interests. But there's really two mindsets clashing here. I think part of the dignity of being human is being virtuous, making the right choices, bearing your own consequences. And I just think there must be better ways to encourage people to look after themselves. And I speak as somebody who lost 2 stone in 2013 because my GP wife started to say to me, you're going to get diabetes, you're going to have a heart attack, you've got to look after yourself. And, I lost 2 stone ever since I've been wrestling with it. But there's absolutely no way I'm willing to surrender this problem to the indignity of the government tracking what I do on an app.
Well, indeed, in China, genuinely, you're given social credit for saying, posting positive tweets about the government and the communist system. You're given negative, and if you cheated a computer game online, negative credits. If you have too many negative credits, you're not allowed to purchase train tickets or plane tickets. We are talking about absolute control of people's lives. And again, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see the slippery slope getting steeper and steeper when we're into vaccine passports and these sort of social credit passports as well.
What do people think that tyranny actually is? It's this kind of total control over what you do and rewards and punishments by the government for not complying with the ideas of ministers and officials for what is right in your life. This frankly, that to implement such a system would be the end of freedom in any meaningful sense. You're not free if you can only be free in minor matters of glutting your lives with simple pleasures. That's all, that stuff's important. I want us to have joyful lives, but you should be free to go through your life making choices, bearing the consequences, and seeking to improve yourself and the lives of others. If we've lost sight of freedom as a virtue in itself, a thing worth striving for, then, really we are going to have to reinvent the entire conversation from hundreds of years of human history, which has elevated our civilization to the great levels that we thought we'd reached.
Tell me what people listening right now, or my guests, what can we do to stop all of this from happening?
It's really important that you write to your member of parliament.
They listen. Do MPs take it seriously when people do?
They do. Especially if you send a personal note and send it politely. If you're looking like an angry person who's never going to vote for your MP, then they will just put you down as an opponent. But if you're somebody who'd like to be voting for that MP, who has strong views and who expresses politely what you would like your member of parliament to do, which is to oppose vaccine passports, to oppose digital IDs, to oppose any measure that moves down this slippery slope, then they will take that very seriously, because we all like to be re-elected. If we're not in parliament, we're not doing anything. And I can't really overemphasize how important it is that people let their member of parliament know politely what they would like, because if they don't, MPs will just continue dragging on, doing whatever they're told by their whips. And as we've seen, the Labour Party is not providing any opposition to all this stuff. Indeed, I've had one Labour MP joke with me that we are laughing at us, the Conservatives, because we're now implementing socialism. So I'm afraid unless the public say no, and say no by politely writing to their MPs, we are just going to keep drifting down this technocratic, controlling route into the kind of tyranny which they have in China.
Steve Baker, thank you for joining us. I think we're all just going to have a little moment now. Steve Baker, Deputy Chair of the COVID Recovery Group.